Hello and welcome to Top Story. Georgia's president is often portrayed in the West as a model democrat in the former Soviet republics. But opponents have long argued this is just a facade, and they say Mikhail Saakashvili has shown his true face by cracking down violently on mass protests over the past few days and declaring a state of emergency last night. Yesterday, police used tear gas and a water cannon to disperse thousands of demonstrators who were blocking the center of the capital, Tbilisi. This is the biggest challenge to Saakashvili since he swept to power in the peaceful Rose Revolution of November 2003. At the heart of the crisis is the government's decision to reschedule the parliamentary election. The opposition says the new date strongly favors the president. But it's not the only issue that rankles with Saakashvili's increasingly vocal critics. To discuss this standoff, I'm joined now from Tbilisi by David Darchiashvili, Executive Director of the Open Society Georgia Foundation, which aims to promote democracy. Mr. Darchiashvili, thank you very much for being on Top Story this morning. Saakashvili has this image.
Welcome.
Thank you. Saakashvili has this image as a pro-Western reformer, so this declaration of a state of emergency doesn't look very good.
Well, you know, to understand the situation, one has to think twice, probably. It's a country which is just 4 years old. I don't mean centuries old Georgian culture, which is sort of something very precious for any Georgian, but I mean a modern political system. It just counts only 4 years, and of course, the birth of Georgian modern democratic nation would not have been easy from any angle if you look at it.
So it shouldn't be judged by European standards, so to speak. I just want to ask you about Russia, because we've had this accusation from the president that Russia is stirring trouble. How do you interpret that?
Well, that's obvious. I mean, there are too many evidences. I do not mean sort of hard evidences of crime, which also can probably be revealed, but it's a matter of investigation. I mean political statements and behavior of Russian political elite towards Georgia. That is very hostile, and seemingly any Russian who has to do something with politics in Russia, or almost any Russian, and especially government, cannot really tolerate existence of modern Georgian independent nation. They like Georgians, but as an ethnographic curiosity. And they still cannot, forget that for 200 years this small nation was under their patronage and influence, and they want to return this history back. So they are meddling in Georgian politics, of course, for at least 15 years since that time when Georgian nation started to fight for its liberation.
But specifically in this crisis, you don't see any concrete evidence of Russian involvement?
Well, I see these concrete evidences. Of course, I see. I do not want to talk about those concrete evidences which has to do with the investigation of criminal case. There are such evidences also, but you better talk with lawyers about it.
Okay.
But since 2004, when Putin said about its neighboring nation that its government is paid by Soros, so that was very hostile statement, and that indicated how Russian government was going to treat Georgian government.
Okay, let's talk about the opposition. What are its grievances?
Grievances of whom against whom?
The opposition, the different opposition groups that have been organizing these protests.
You know, tens of thousands of ordinary citizens who went out into the streets in November the 2nd, they have their own grievances, and some of those are really justifiable. As I said, 3 years or 4 years old government could not have done everything perfectly, and there were mistakes and missteps. But my feeling is that overall direction, very painful, towards modernization of this nation, towards reforming its rather clan-based, corrupt political structures was very rightful, but it was painful, and many ordinary citizens were harmed because of that. And that's what just brought them out to the streets. But the political leaders in the opposition who wanted to use these grievances of the ordinary citizens, they had totally different agenda. Again, it's difficult to speak about any of these opposition leaders. They were too many and too diverse. But some of them clearly, explicitly had relations with Russian intelligence services. That is very obvious for me. And others had slogans, again very clearly articulated, demanding Georgia's return to its past, to old feudal, clannish, Soviet-style systems.
But of course the opposition would claim that actually this is not about Russia at all. It's about, for example, improving living standards in Georgia and finding out who is behind perhaps political murders and various other dark criminal cases.
Well, there are, of course, criminal cases which should further be investigated. But then the protest should have been made because of that, because of losing jobs, because of harsh social economic conditions, not just because of the election date, whether it should be taken in April or October. That is the secondary issue, I think. And political opposition should have fought for the election law and the composition of the election commission. That is all understandable. That is are all very legitimate concerns. And there should be a dialogue about it. But then eventually slogans went into just overthrowing of this government, and that is not just simply anti-governmental but anti-state activity, and that plays at hands of Russia. That's the problem. I mean, problem is that unfortunately, but again that's the paradox of 21st century, very undemocratic forces started playing democratic game. That's how, for example, Hamas came into power. But again, you can recall even more historical cases. Hitler came into power through elections. I believe that not just current governmental figures look like Hitler, although they have lots of mistakes, and this mistake should be improved. But some people in the opposition look like him.
We'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much, David Darchashvili from the Open Society, the Soros Foundation in Georgia, in Tbilisi. Do join me at the same time tomorrow for another edition of Top Story.